If you're an avoider, this might surprise you because avoiders don't usually think of themselves as driven, but you are. You care deeply about doing meaningful work, making good decisions, and not wasting your energy on things that don't matter. Where things get complicated is when pressure shows up. Instead of pushing harder or planning more, your instinct is to pull back. You delay, you disengage, you wait until things feel clearer, calmer, or more defined before you move.
Avoiders are often misunderstood. From the outside, it can look like procrastination or lack of motivation, but that's not what's happening. Avoiders don't avoid because they don't care. They avoid because situations feel too big, too vague, or too emotionally loaded. When expectations aren't clear, stepping away feels safer than stepping forward and getting it wrong. If you've ever thought, I'll deal with this later, or I just need space before I can handle this, you're not broken. You're responding the way your brain knows how.
Let's start by being very clear about what actually defines an avoider, because this matters. Avoiders are selective. You're thoughtful about where you put your energy, your attention, your effort. You don't like spinning your wheels on things that feel pointless or misaligned. You tend to notice when expectations don't make sense, when tasks feel bloated, or when the emotional cost of something outweighs the payoff. That discernment is real and it's valuable. And it's the reason avoiders often have strong values and a clear sense of what they don't want to spend their time on.
Avoiders are also very sensitive to ambiguity. When something feels undefined, open-ended, or emotionally charged, your system flags it as risky. Not because you're fragile, but because you're perceptive. You can sense when something is poorly scoped or when expectations haven't been thought through. The problem is that instead of clarifying those things immediately, avoiders often step back entirely. Disengaging feels like the safest option until the situation feels more manageable. And because avoidance brings temporary relief, it quickly becomes the default response.
Here's the loop avoiders tend to get stuck in. Something needs to be done. A decision, a task, a conversation, a project. The task feels bigger than it should, not because of the work itself, but because everything that's attached to it. Expectations are unclear, stakes are high, emotions are involved. Instead of breaking it down, the avoider steps back. The task gets postponed, not out of laziness, but out of self-protection. And for a moment, that distance feels like relief.
But the relief doesn't last. That task doesn't disappear. It just waits. And as time passes, urgency starts creeping in. Deadlines get closer, consequences get louder. What started as a manageable task now feels even heavier because it's overdue. Avoiders then swing into last-minute intensity, rushing to get things done under pressure. That cycle, disengage, delay, scramble, is exhausting. And it reinforces the belief that work is always stressful instead of showing that the stress came from waiting too long to define the work.
This is why advice like just push through it or you just need more discipline completely misses the mark for avoiders. Force doesn't create movement for you. It creates resistance. When tasks feel emotionally heavy or poorly defined, adding more pressure only increases the urge to step back. Avoiders don't lack discipline. They lack clarity. And without that clarity, the motivation drops fast.
There's also a shame cycle involved, and it often gets layered on top. Avoiders tell themselves they should be able to handle this. They compare themselves to people who seem to power through everything. And that comparison makes the task feel even heavier. The more personal weight gets attached to the work, the harder it is to start. Pushing harder doesn't solve that. It just deepens the shutdown.
Let's talk honestly about the cost of avoidance, because it's more than missed deadlines. Avoidance creates constant background stress. Even when you're not actively working on the task, it's sitting in the back of your mind. The mental clutter drains energy and focus. You can't fully relax because you know something is waiting. Over time, that constant low-level tension becomes exhausting.
Avoidance also leads to reactive work patterns. Instead of moving steadily, you're always responding to urgency. That makes it hard to trust yourself. You start believing that the only way you can get things done is under pressure. And that belief keeps the cycle going. You're not building consistency, you're surviving deadlines. And that's not sustainable for someone who actually wants their work to feel meaningful.
Here's the shift avoiders need to hear clearly. You don't need more motivation. You don't need more pressure. You need work that feels startable. Avoiders move when the path is defined and the emotional weight is reduced. When that task is clear, contained, resistance drops naturally.
This is where avoiders often feel relief. The issue was never that you didn't want to do the work. It was that the work felt too big, too vague, or too loaded to step into safely. Once you remove those barriers, movement becomes possible again without forcing yourself.
The most important tool for avoiders is defining the next step, not the entire project. Avoiders stall when everything feels bundled together. Goals, expectations, emotions, and outcomes all blur into one overwhelming task. Breaking that apart is essential. Ask yourself, what is the next concrete action? Something specific, something observable, something that doesn't require emotional processing to begin.
The key is clarity, not ease. The step might still feel uncomfortable, but it shouldn't feel confusing. When you know exactly what you're supposed to do, how long it will take, and what it produces, your brain stops fighting you. Movement becomes possible because the task is no longer threatening. You're not committing to everything, you're just starting something small and defined.
Avoiders struggle with long timelines. When something stretches out indefinitely, it becomes harder to engage. The future feels heavy and motivation fades. Shortening the time horizon makes work feel manageable. Instead of asking, how do I finish this? Ask, what can I do in the next 15 minutes?
Those shorter windows lower resistance. They make starting feel safe. You're not signing up for endless effort. You're just engaging briefly. And once you start, momentum often follows naturally. Progress doesn't come from grand plans. It comes from consistent, contained action.
Another critical shift for avoiders is separating identity from output. Avoiders often attach meaning to work, what it says about them, whether it reflects their values, whether it will disappoint someone. That emotional weight makes tasks feel heavier than they need to be.
When you treat work as a neutral action instead of a personal statement, resistance drops. A task is not a verdict on your character. It's just something to be done. Removing that emotional layer makes it easier to show up consistently instead of only under pressure.
When avoiders apply these shifts, something important changes. The background anxiety fades. Tasks stop looming. Work becomes something you can engage with steadily instead of something you avoid until the last minute. Progress feels calmer and more predictable.
You don't lose your discernment. You don't stop caring. You simply stop letting unclear work control your energy. Over time, trust rebuilds, not because you forced yourself, but because you showed yourself that you can move forward without overwhelming yourself.
If you're an avoider, here's the action to take this week. Take one thing you've been putting off and make it smaller and clearer than it is right now. Not easier, but clearer. Write down exactly what the next step is, how long it should take, and when you'll do it.
Avoiders don't stall because they don't care. We stall when tasks feel too big, too open-ended, or too loaded. Clarity removes that friction.
You actually don't even need to feel motivated to start. You need a starting point that doesn't feel overwhelming.
And your ability to step back and evaluate is a strength. When you pair it with clear, contained actions, you stop reacting at the last minute and start moving steadily again.